Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Frankenstein chat. This is one of our spotlight editions. In fact, it's number 28 of our spotlight editions. And these spotlights, we normally have a guest or a couple of guests who come and join us, and they talk about a particular topic. And I'm delighted to say that Malcolm Greenhalgh just joined us this morning. Hello, Malcolm.
Hi, good to see you.
Yeah, yeah. And we're going to talk about something actually going to take us back in time a little bit, back to I think 2012. And there's sort of a journey from there, but we're going to try and sort of get to the what should happen now as quickly as we can, because it'd be very easy
Yeah.
to spend the 30 minutes or so just talking about what went wrong. And I think we want to end up with a positive framework for the future. But before we do, do you want to just explain to colleagues who perhaps don't know you, a little bit about your history, and then lead into the topic that's got you agitated for a number of years?
Oh, right, okay, can do that. I've got a bit of a mixed background, so that's the first thing. Born into a working class family, went to a technical school, having passed my level plus, but the curriculum didn't suit. My father worked in the cotton industry, lost his job. We moved to northeast Derbyshire. I moved to one of the first comprehensive schools. And I think that has had a massive influence on my thinking, because I moved from a curriculum that didn't suit me into a curriculum that was varied, and I could pick and choose subjects that were much more suited to myself. Went on to St Luke's College in Exeter to get my teaching degree, which was in economics, and then went into, strangely, my first job was a merit post in a prep school. Totally alien to me. It was a great experience. I could only stand it for 3 years, and then I had to leave and go into sort of the real world, in a sense.
I have to say, just to open it up a little, I saw one of the best lessons as an HMI in a prep school. It was one of those lessons where I thought that I've mentioned this to Stan before, but the head teacher put 10 words up on the board and they were reading Louis Sacker's Holes. And I thought, this is going to go down the pan. I can feel it. I can still remember virtually every single element of that lesson. It was just phenomenal. So I also found myself in a very uncomfortable position going into that prep school, actually knowing very little about prep schools and how they work and what they're about.
I mean, they're a society of their own, really, the private school education. And they had a very strict curriculum. So you had to follow your curriculum. And then I got a job in the local primary school. And the day before I started, I obviously went in to get prepared, one day in advance.
Remember
And
those days, Stan? You got the key to your classroom the day before the term
Well,
started.
absolutely. So I went well, I had to find a head teacher who was there somewhere, and he was nearing retirement as well. And I said, "Look, can we have a chat about what you want me to do?" Having been used to a very strict curriculum, and he said, "Well, that's up to you," and basically walked away. So I had this situation. We're having 36 year three children with a blank piece of paper, and I had to then design what I felt was going to be the right sort of learning from my small amount of experience that would help to develop and move them all on as individual children, because I had SEND children, I had no TA, and it was it was an eye-opening experience. But having got my degree as a secondary teacher, I did sort of fall in love with teaching young kids, and that started at the prep school and then continued. So anyway, I advanced in the primary network. I didn't want to take a headship in a small school, and eventually I was getting my economics background took over a little bit, and I started. This is in the early late 80s, running tutoring company. This is while I was deputy head in a school. And that led to different things. And eventually, I met up with a guy who was interested in setting up a bigger business, and we created Benchmark Educational Services, which one of the biggest moves we made was going into Ofsted.
Yeah.
And I became a registered inspector quite quickly, and we grew Benchmark into one of the biggest Ofsted companies in the country. In fact, at some points we were running more inspections than anybody else. So, and that you mentioned earlier about the experiences you have an inspector going into different types of schools and experiencing things that you perhaps hadn't had experience of was a massive learning curve.
Yeah.
And you know, I'll always remember very specific things that have then influenced me in what I've done since becoming an inspector, and then setting up another business because we sold out to Tribal, and that was more of a school improvement business. So, but one of the things that continues to stick in my mind was going into very small primaries where you only had 2 classes, and in the higher age class you had 7-year-olds to 11-year-olds, and the experience of analysing how well they were learning individually and how 7-year-olds were mixing with 11-year-olds has actually influenced significantly my thinking about meeting the individual needs of pupils, rather than what we're going on to talk about is what happened after 2012.
Yeah. So well, Stan, I mean, a lot of we met for the first time in some small Cumbrian primary schools, didn't we, with 2 or 3 classes when we started doing inspections in 1995 as seconded head teachers. So yeah, there was a bit of, I don't want to labour this, but I do remember one of the training programs we had was we were shown a video of a teacher in a primary school where there was 1 class. So all the children were actually doing this experiment together. And we were then asked at the end of it, you know, because it was amazing what they were doing. You know, it was way beyond my understanding. But the older kids seemed to know it, but the younger kids had no idea what was going on. Absolutely. But of course, that lesson was repeated 7 times in their time in the school. So by the end of it, they'd repeated that lesson, had a chance to do it 7 times. So we were then asked, how effective is the teaching? How effective is the learning? That's a really interesting question, I think, to consider. And of course, if you're there 7 years and you don't get bored by it, you know, it might be quite useful, quite interesting. But actually, you know, doing the same thing every year, you know, yeah. Anyway, the reason why I think today is going to be particularly interesting around curriculum development is that you reminded us of the expert panel that was introduced in 2012 by the coalition government when Michael Gove was the Education Secretary of State for Education, and he asked some experts to come in and advise him on the future of the curriculum. So it was good that you reminded me, because I didn't realise that there was a bit of a fallout in that panel, the panel of experts, and it's quite interesting to see, you know, some of the people who didn't support it, some who seemed to go and take their own path, really. But it was quite clear that even though Michael Gove might not have had an idea what was going to happen at the beginning of the expert panel, he had a pretty clear idea how he wanted it to land afterwards. So do you want to pick up on your feelings about that panel?
Yeah, I mean, just relating it back to that, the lesson, the mixed-aged lesson. I think what disappointed me most was not listening to the expert panel and then misguiding us as to what they said to a certain extent. And we ended up with the age-related endpoint curriculum that we have now. And when I take myself back to that particular lesson, it was clear that age didn't matter. Age wasn't the influence as to how well those children learned. It was what their capabilities were and what their start points were, and how they built on that. So that just one occasion, it wasn't more than one, but it's occasions like that directed me in the direction I went in, and why I was so disappointed with what happened in 2012. Because what we have now is a curriculum that is age related, it's fixed to endpoints. Every child is expected to achieve the same when we know they won't, and we know the start points are different. And yet we'll still go into the next year group and right now we're starting this year's curriculum. And yet some of those children are just not ready for it. And it's not anything to do with age, it's about where you are on your learning journey.
Yes.
And if we ignore where children are on their learning journey, then how do we ensure they're going to be successful learners? And I think that for me is the key to it all. That if learners don't feel that they are successful, they then disengage with it.
Yeah.
And I think
we base it around an average when we judge it, which deems 50% below average.
well, absolutely.
I was toying with that today. Even if you take sort of 10% either side of the mean to say, all right, so as Ofsted terms broadly in line with averages, it's still 40%.
Yes. Yeah.
40% children fail.
Yeah. We can't base a curriculum on average. We have to base a curriculum on meeting the needs of every child who's in the system. That's equity. Whereas for some reason we've got confused with equal opportunity and equity and an age-related curriculum. And we have to take into account some of those children in each year group are a year older than other children.
Yeah.
And when I was working with Ofsted, and I was mainly working in primary schools, we always used to get the data that showed that by the end of Key Stage 1, if you were autumn born, you attained on average the whole term better than the spring-born, and the spring-borns naturally did a whole term better than the summer-born. Now, being a summer-born child, I now begin to realise the disadvantage I might have had when I was in school, being young and immature for my sort of age group. But that's a critical factor, that the current system is based on nonsense. We can't treat children who are a whole year different in age the same and expect them to have the same outcomes, never mind their special needs or whatever else, social, emotional difficulties that they're having and all of that. If we base it on, yes, this is where we start the curriculum and this is where we're going to end it, it's going to fail too many children and they'll get disengaged.
It's a factory model, isn't it? It's a factory model.
Of course it is,
absolutely. At one end, they go through the same processes, and at the end, they come out all the same. That's the theory.
Well, that's the theory, but that's not the reality.
No, and we have an exam system that is built on the fact that it needs that graph and that sort of the usual distribution. So, and we end up with a grade 4 being judged to be a pass, no matter how you wrap that up.
Yeah.
That's how it's viewed by parents, by employers, by colleges. So actually, I find it quite disgusting, really, when we find young people being blamed for the fact that they've not really had a relevant curriculum, when in fact they've worked out far quicker than some of the teachers that actually they're not going to make that, they're not going to get in that top 70%. They've worked that out already, so.
Absolutely. And why are we surprised that they're dodging lessons or not attending school and all of the other things wrapped? And the data that we have is not looking good, with the number of kids who are opting out, disengaging with the system. And that's what we have to look at. We have to look at, well, why have we got a system that's unfair to start with? Should we have a system that's unfair to start with?
Yes.
And if we're starting with that logical point, then it's going to fail a lot of people. And that's not what I'm in the job for. I'm in the job to try and make every learner I have contact with, and always have had, to be successful learners. Then they have a bit more motivation. they then want to come to school to learn because they're enjoying it, because they're successful. And you ask any child, what's your favorite subject? It's always the one they're best at.
Mm.
Well, it's just little things like that that we seem to ignore, and
Yes.
that's
I
why
think
I'm dead concerned about it. And yes, and as you said, we need to think, well, how do we sort this out? Because we have to sort it out.
what we've got is, and this is gets on to one of my favourite things, it's survivor syndrome. That the curriculum, the education system is designed by people to replicate what they had success with. So
Yes, absolutely.
it's not designed for people who are different to them. So we
No,
get the best brains as we see it and say design an education system. So they immediately think, well, we were successful, therefore that must be the model, instead of looking at those who didn't survive it or didn't do well in it
yeah,
and
yeah.
looking at a model that would support them better.
And I think that's what I enjoyed about the comprehensive school system, is that it got rid of, well, not all parts of the country, but it got rid of the 11 plus examination. It enabled schools to have a broader intake of children, and therefore they had to meet the needs of all of those children, and therefore the curriculum was broadened as a result of that, from not being totally academic in grammar schools and not being totally technical in secondary modern schools, but a mixture of all of them. And then you could choose as you were getting older, going through school, where you wanted to learn, where you felt you could learn best. And that brings you back to why we ignore what the children themselves know about themselves.
Yeah.
Because that's what we do. We don't listen to them. In every lesson, we don't listen to where they are. We don't give them chance to reflect on their learning and say, well, I don't really get this, whilst the lesson's going on, formative assessment at its best. And we just carry on. And then we have teachers who come to me and say, well, how can I meet the needs of all the children? Because I either move the lesson on for the ones who have got it, or I halt the lesson and go and review the ones who don't get it, knowing that they're not going to get it anyway, because it's just beyond their own level of where they are on their learning journey. But if teachers are coming to me asking that question, I've got a big concern as to how do they then meet the needs of all the children in the class, and I don't think they do.
No,
So
and
yes,
it's so frustrating, isn't it? Because those of us who are brought up, people would say, "Oh, well, going back to the point you made about, well, when I went into year three for the first time, I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't know what I was expected to teach. You might have known what you're doing, sorry, but we weren't told what you've got to teach, and obviously that, you work that out, but actually at the end of the day, you end up in that sort of environment with that sort of training that I had, where actually there's going to be a variety of capability or ability or whatever interest in all of those children, and you, in my training, were taught or encouraged to embrace that. It's not something you're never going to get it in the primary school. Well, I haven't found it where they're going to be set. There is a little bit of that coming, but actually it's a mixed ability group, a mixed interest group, and actually as such. So when I see, when I go into secondary schools, which I still do, and I look at year 10 maths lesson, which is in my head now, thinking, well, actually you've put got all these children here and you're doing this work. They don't understand why they're doing this work in year 10. They don't really, they're not interested in it. They don't see the relevance of it. You're not really inspiring them to consider what the benefit of this is. And then they're disaffected, and anybody who spends any time in a school, particularly if you've been in a primary school, you will see some of these difficulties later on in the system where teachers actually are just so driven by a damn exam that all they're about is get the exams. That's the goal. They've got to get over the line, regardless of whether or not it's relevant for them. And my final point is, we're sitting on an economy that we've not been able to move for years. But no one has ever thought about, well, what are we teaching the children the right things?
Yeah, no,
Are we giving
absolutely.
them a
Yeah.
set of skills that enables them to set a business up on their own? Are we thinking about the fact, I keep going on, I can get a host of 2 1-degree graduates in Cheadle Hume, can't get a plumber for love nor money.
I think, Frank, there's two challenges, isn't there, when we start to look forward. One is we've got to cease preparing young people for jobs that won't exist by the
Yeah,
time they are
absolutely.
teaching. And
Yeah.
we've got to start to think about preparing young people for jobs that we don't know will exist in the future. We can't say what they'll be because they don't exist
I
currently.
don't know. And I think one of the things that upsets me a lot as well is the loss of creativity. I mean, go back to my experience going into the primary school, no curriculum. I had to be creative. Not saying that was a good thing, because I was really pleased when the 1988 national curriculum came
Well, I
out.
am, because you could do water and do Noah's Ark every year in primary school and work it out into some thematic project that you were involved in. So there are weaknesses. We're not suggesting that it was the halcyon days.
No, but I think in many ways it was. And what is more, and we're seeing more and more now, is the loss of creativity with teachers. They're just part of, as you said, it's part of a factory process. It's a production line. And
Delivering the curriculum, that phrase really annoys me.
What's that?
Delivering the curriculum.
Delivering.
Teachers are deliverers, not teachers.
no, absolutely. But that's what they are, and that's what Ofsted measures against now. So everything's been condensed into this narrow profile of what education should look like. When my experience around the world, since leaving Ofsted or developing the second business, I've been to many places around the world, been to so many different types of schools. You begin to realise that no, this isn't the only way that we should be educating the kids. There are many models around that are much more suited to what you're talking about in terms of how do we prepare the children for the future, because that's now the key thing. And we have to think that the children coming into school now will leave in 2040. Now we're halfway through the 21st century. So, and have we moved on during this century? And I don't see that we have. In fact, I feel we're going backwards. And I think if we don't identify a way to prepare children for the future, not just only in jobs, but we know that they're under massive pressure, children in school now, under social media, etc. And well-being is critically important. And, we don't want them to be lost in a sea of untruths in many ways.
Yeah.
So, I think if we're looking to move forward, I feel that the central part of a curriculum should be about the dispositions, what we used to call the person learning thinking skills, which was taken out of the curriculum.
Yeah.
Again, why? These are critical skills that every child going through school needs to be able to adapt to the future. And if we, because it's so changing so rapidly, we don't know what the future is going to be like in 2040. We're not sure about what skills will be needed. And therefore, if we don't move the curriculum on radically, then these children are going to be leaving schools as they are now and not finding jobs. Now, there was a BBC program about, the kids leaving school at 18 with good qualifications, but can't find a job. They've applied for hundreds of jobs and still can't get a job. They've not been well prepared in terms of what they've studied, perhaps, how they've studied it, what skills they've come out of school with, and they're not being taken on by the companies that can offer jobs in a modern society. And we don't, as you say, we don't know what that's going to be. So, if we're looking forward,
yes,
we either don't change the system and fall further behind from where we're going to be, or we change it. And to change it, I'm my own thinking, it's got to be some sort of radical change. because the people who have the best idea of where the job market, for example, is going are the ones who are creating them.
Mm.
But we don't use that knowledge in developing the school curriculum.
Mm.
We seem to stick with the universities, stick with whatever, and things that we stuck with 100 years ago, and it's not doing us any good.
Yeah.
So that's this for me. That's got to be the direction. The problem is, how do we get there?
Yeah, I think just picking up on the point about preparation for work, when there is there's less work available, but actually that means that I think we've lost something around picking up on your creativity point about the personal enjoyment of life. How the things you can do that actually make living an enjoyable experience and a worthwhile experience. And I think the thing around, I was always a little bit suspicious of spiritual, moral, social, and cultural development, but that is still in the law, although it's been downgraded, to an extent that it's virtually impossible. No one really considers it. But when you look at spiritual, moral, social, and cultural development, actually that embraces a lot of these aspects that actually seem to have been lost, and I think that for me, just revisiting that and what those four areas mean to a child, I think is a very valuable place to go in order to re-energize our thoughts about what the future of a curriculum ought to include. Yeah.
I think where I am in my thinking at the moment is we've got to have an equitable system, otherwise it's unfair. So we can't have that. But we also, because of economic change and the way that society is changing and so on, we need to have a curriculum that's flexible. So if we have a very tight curriculum, as we have now, there's no flexibility. And we also know, because it's age-related, there's no equity either. So it fails on the two most important things that we need to create in a new curriculum that will meet the needs of all, as best we can, meet the needs of all the pupils who are going through the system. So I don't know where the term has come from, but I think it might have been picked up from somewhere. But my idea is inclusive flexibility. So it includes inclusivity, which is equitable, and flexibility, which then prepares the kids going through school to what they're likely to face when they leave. And central to that has to be dispositions.
Yes.
And then the curriculum subject areas, whatever they may be, because we don't know what they're going to be anyway, are built around the dispositions. And then the dispositions have to be included in whatever area of the curriculum you're studying or working to. And I think if we can use that as a fundamental start point, it just may begin to open up our ideas as to what a futuristic curriculum may look like. And let's get rid of exams as well to a certain extent, because that's helping. What value are we going to put to exams based on traditional examination systems? I'm not sure we can in the future, and we have to accept that the kids in school now know they can go and learn things away from school. They're not now reliant on school anymore. They know that if they become a TikTok star or whatever, they've got a pathway to having a job in life, an occupation that's actually rewarding financially and emotionally. So, and all that's going on around us, but it's not in school.
When we ban phones at the same time.
I can understand that some of the safeguarding.
I can,
but instead of managing that and seeing that as the major focus, I think I agree we shouldn't have mobile phones in school because of the issues on social media, but we don't seem to be managing that side of it. It's much easier to just ban them or say you can only look at them so many times a day or whatever. We've got to manage that. It's not
This
going to
is
go
social
away.
media impacting on the use of a useful tool.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's not going to go away, social media.
Yes.
It's not
You're
going to
right,
change.
Malcolm.
No, but we have to teach. This is where the dispositions are really important,
Yeah.
because we have to teach children, young adults, and people who are 16 who are going to be able to vote in the future. We have to be able to help guide and support them in how to manage a changing world. That's got to be the crucial element to what's the purpose of coming to school? It's to prepare them for life afterwards. Because if we're not doing that, we're letting them down, and we can't afford to let our future generations down. So I mean that's where my mind goes, and if we don't tap into the resources that are around outside the traditional school system to create avenues for learning that are acceptable in schools, then we're missing out on a massive amount of learning areas that are going to be relevant to the future, but we're not including. So we have to somehow incorporate the minds of those who have the best ideas of where we're going to be in 2040, in 2060, and so on. And without then incorporating that into options that are available for the children in school, then they're not going to be prepared.
No.
So we have to somehow incorporate those mindsets into creating options. And then the role of the teacher, I think we still should have, it's too radical to go totally down that road. And I think we still need what I'm sort of calling an entitlement curriculum, which is a bit like the traditional subject areas.
Yeah.
But we can do that in half the timetable. And then the other half of the timetable can be the kids, the teachers, outside communities can influence what they do in that 50%.
You may have a very, I was at the Association of Education Advisors on conference at Manchester Airport last week. And I'm not name dropping now, but I am. But I was sitting next to Estelle Morris. And Estelle Morris was giving, it was one of those sort of after the meal, she went on a stage with somebody else and somebody interviewed her. And she was talking about the 50-50 curriculum, where actually there is a body of knowledge that, everybody in the country is entitled to in a way, a sense that this is the core bit. But actually what didn't happen when the national curriculum was produced, in effect, it was like, just throw everything that you think as a geographer into a bucket and we'll try and make it all work work. And she was saying about the greater flexibility for the 50%, to enable schools to reflect their community, but also to reflect the economic opportunities that exist in that area. So in a way, I think, and she won't be alone. That's not just an Estelle Morris idea, is it? That's probably somewhere in government at the moment.
Well, that would be good to know, because I haven't spoken to Estelle Morris. I haven't read anything that she's been talking about. So it's really, from my perspective, it's really pleasing that the way my mind is going isn't alone, because I lose confidence sometimes in that idea, that concept, because I talk to people and they look at me as though I'm mad,
Yeah.
So Malcolm is to watch a few Ken Robinson videos.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that brings you back into the right mindset. But
So
I think what we've got is you've got this radical future that's up here, and we've got where we are now.
And we've got to close
and it's
it.
finding the right steps, because whatever we think, schools won't change radically in one go. It's going to be a process of development. What are the steps that we can take? And I think the 50-50 idea would be a good first or second step to say we're freeing up the curriculum. These are the things we think you should be doing in that time.
And involving those who know, not the
the
ones who don't know.
For me, it's not going fast enough. The key. I've completed the key stage 4 consultation on performance tables and the various buckets. We're still in these subjects. We're still in these subjects. And should we let them do an extra science? Well, if they're bloody good at science, let them do another science. Let them do 4 sciences if it's really what grabs their their attention.
And they can do that in the other 50% of the
Yeah,
chicken.
well, you could.
Absolutely, if they wanted to. That's the free learning time, isn't it?
Yeah.
Choose where you want to develop your own thinking.
Stan, I think that we need to draw together another expert panel and make sure Malcolm's on it.
I'll be delighted, but yeah, it's a big challenge for
Estelle, because I've chatted with Estelle Morris before, and she's got a really sharp mind, and on top of that, she's got the knowledge of being a politician,
Yes.
and
the dangers and the difficulties of that.
Well,
the opportunities.
That's something for the future. Then I'd be delighted to get involved in that.
Well, yeah. I mean, just while we're bringing this to a close, I also on that table was Mick Waters, Stan. Somebody you admire a lot, and he's agreed. Well, he invited himself onto the chat, so we'll be able to take forward this discussion, Malcolm, with Mick to see whether how he would develop it. Because I don't think he was fully aligned with the 50-50, but I think he was aligned with a lot more of what Estelle was saying and trying to shake it up much more than is currently happening. But anyway,
look forward to that.
Yeah. Malcolm, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a fascinating
my pleasure.
chat.
Thank you.
And
thank you for having me.
No, I'm glad we got round to fitting it all in. So anyway, so that's the end of the 28th edition of the Frank and Stan Chat Spotlight. And we're back next week as we head towards the half-term break. And also, Stan, just to let people, you've got a rather big birthday coming up soon, haven't you?
Oh, yeah. Let's tell everybody that I'm an old man.
Well, I just really wanted to put a marker down as to what might happen as we head towards it. But anyway, so thank you, Malcolm. Thank you, everybody, for watching and listening. And we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.